I'm not trying to take credit for this idea because many people across YouTube and Twitter have been suggesting it for the past couple of days, but I thought in today's video it might be fun for me to actually advocate a little bit as to why I think the iPhone Air, maybe not this year, but perhaps next, could make a lot of sense to be the first portless iPhone in order to fix one of what is a lot of people's biggest deal breaker with the current model. Let's begin. So I guess when a lot of people were talking about there being a hypothetical portless iPhone in the future, or even just a thinner, lighter iPhone in general, they didn't realize that stereo speakers exactly was one of the limiting factors preventing such a thin and lightweight iPhone from happening. I feel like a lot of people are somewhat forgiving of the camera, especially because the camera on the iPhone Air is still a pretty good one. It's the standard wide angle lens that's 48 megapixels, so you can still crop in and preserve quite a bit of quality with that lens. The ultra wide is known for being somewhat softer than the regular lens anyway, and even battery life seems to be, at least on paper, on par with the 16 Pro. We'll see if in the real world Apple's claims end up to be a little bit more exaggerated. But what I keep seeing come up online, what I keep seeing bothering people the most is the stereo speakers, and rightfully so. You know, this has been a pretty standard feature for the past 9 years. The last iPhone Apple released that did not have stereo speakers was the iPhone 6S, which came out 10 years ago. Once we got stereo speakers on the iPhone 7, that basically became the norm, and we've had that on pretty much every year's generation up until now. So because it's been around for so long, I understand completely why a lot of people are upset that that was removed, and maybe we'll find out in everyday usage that a lot of people are just using their phone in the portrait mode orientation more than they used to, thanks to vertical videos, you know, Instagram Reels and TikTok, and picture-in-picture availability on media sites, which means even when you're watching landscape videos, you often minimize it and have something else going on in the background. Or if you're watching in landscape mode, maybe you're using AirPods more regularly as wireless headphones have become so commonplace. But I think way more people would probably be open to the iPhone Air if it had the traditional stereo speakers, but the big question is, if that came at the cost of having a physical port on the phone, would people make that trade-off? I'm arguing in this video, I think a lot of people would, because of the spirit of the iPhone Air being about holding the future, and a lot of this phone is already a compromise in some regards, you know, smaller battery, single camera, missing out on millimeter wave connectivity, so it's clearly intended for a demographic of people that prefer form over function to a certain extent, and I just want the record to be known, this is coming from a guy that spoke out against portless iPhones for a long, long time. I made all kinds of videos explaining why a portless iPhone was a bad idea. It just overcomplicates the iPhone, especially if you have some kind of boot loop or software bug that requires a hard reset. It gets more complicated to try to fix. But the reason I'm coming around to the idea now is because the Air is completely separate now from the iPhone Pros. They may share a chip, but I feel like Apple can compensate for the kind of people that are like, no, I prefer physical ports, especially for data transferring or for hard resetting or when they need to troubleshoot a problem or something. That demographic of people will still have multiple options to choose from. They'll have the 17 Pro and Pro Max, and of course the base 17, which is the best value this year in the entire lineup. So the iPhone Air can basically be catered towards that demographic of people that really, really love MagSafe and wireless charging. I know a lot of people, at least watching my channel in the comments, that were all in favor of a portless future, and they spoke out against the European Union enforcing USB-C on the iPhone because they were like, no, let Apple innovate. Let Apple make a portless iPhone if they want to. That would allow the phone to be thinner and do all these cool things. And I argued with many of you on just like, no, that would be too complicated. But I think Apple could cater to both. It's like, if you care about having a port on your phone, there's a phone for you. And it's a lot more functional. It's better at thermal management. It's better at battery life. And the Pro will be the absolute best fit for a lot of people out there. But if you're that more design emphasis nerd and you're not so much about having the best of the best telephoto lens or ultra wide lens, and you don't care about having 40-watt fast charging or doing data transfers through the Type-C port on your phone, if you're that kind of person, you'd probably be okay with the iPhone Air missing out on that for the argument of, well, it's futuristic, it's lightweight, it now could have stereo speakers, hypothetically, it just doesn't let you charge it via a wire. And another argument in favor of the portless iPhone Air is that the port they included is not that good. In fact, it's been a consistent criticism of the new iPhone that it's $1,000 and it's a USB 2.0 port, okay? So even though it has a Type-C port on there, it's not a very high-speed one, especially for the price, which is kind of embarrassing. There's been USB 3 ports on Android phones that were way cheaper than the iPhone Air, so leaving it at USB 2 is like, okay, you clearly don't care that much about the data transfer speeds anyway. Maybe Apple has a plan in the near future to switch to portless anyway. And before a lot of you start commenting, oh, it wouldn't work, the European Union wouldn't allow it. Well, I've got two counter arguments for you. For one, Apple has already given up on physical SIM cards with the iPhone Air, which has basically delayed the launch of the iPhone in China, a way bigger market than the European Union is. So clearly, Apple has shown in the past they are comfortable with designing a phone in a more innovative manner, even if it means missing out on a huge chunk of the global market. That doesn't seem to have stopped them before. And also, journalists have asked European Union representatives themselves if Apple could get away with a portless iPhone, and despite me saying this is a bad idea and you shouldn't get these kinds of statements on the record, they straight up did answer the media by saying yes, if Apple did develop a super thin portless iPhone that was incapable of fitting a Type-C port, for instance, like an iPhone Air that just replaces that space at the bottom with a speaker, Apple could probably very easily find a loophole in that argument and just say, well, you gotta use MagSafe, which has Type-C on the other end, but because of how radically thin this phone is, we just straight up could not fit a Type-C port in there. At least according to the EU, they could get away with that. I don't think they should be able to, and I think that might create more problems in the future, but I don't personally think there's anything necessarily stopping them from doing it and just saying, well, we'll launch it where it's legal, and the EU will have to decide if we're allowed to sell this phone there. But because the pros are getting more industrial and more functional, I guess I'm more okay and accepting of the idea of the portless iPhone, just as it's not forced down our throats. I wouldn't be in favor of going portless across the entire lineup, especially on the pros. In fact, I would be in favor of the Pro iPhones having two USB-C ports. I would use that. I'd put power or external SSDs in one port, and then I'd put my microphone in the other port. That way I don't have to fumble around with dongles while I'm trying to record my videos and that kind of thing. So a lot of engineering decisions are just like this one. It's a compromise. It's like, yeah, it'd be nice if you could have a Type-C port and speakers, but that would just increase the overall thickness. And sometimes you want to explore thinner, lighter variants and see if there's a market for it. And I'd be very curious if the iPhone Air would have actually sold better if it had dual speakers at the cost of not having a USB-C port. And I personally think the target demographic, the kind of person that is looking for a super thin, super impressive design, they don't care too much about the functionality, they just want it to feel and look cool, that's the same kind of person that would probably MagSafe charge and wirelessly charge everywhere. You guys disagree? Feel free to let me know how you feel about a portless iPhone Air specifically. We're not talking portless regular iPhones or portless iPhone Pros. I think they should stay. They should always have Type-C, at least in my lifetime, but feel free to drop all those thoughts in the comments below. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you all in the next one.